Hi, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich, and I am the Artistic Director of the Alcove New Play Development Program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City. That's a lot of words. Conversations from the Alcove is a series, if you don't know it, that is devoted to playwriting, talking about playwriting, craft, art, life, and the world, not necessarily in that order. And the series has been ongoing for about 2 seasons. And if you're listening in or watching this will be the third season of the series. Today's guest is Sunny Drake. But first, I want to start with an audio description. So I am a fair-skinned person with, right now my hair is more on the brownish side than the auburn side. It is pulled up. I'm wearing glasses that are round and cover a great deal of my face. They're rather big and they're perched on the edge of my nose. I have red lipstick. My eyes are brown. I'm wearing a top that is polka dots. It's a blue, navy top with white polka dots on it. And behind me is a virtual background of a wonderful bookshelf full of beautiful books and things that I wish I had. This is my little dream bookshelf behind me. And to my right is Sunny Drake, our guest for today. I'll start with a brief bio from their website. I could go on and on and on, but I'll just read a little bit. Sunny is a writer, creator, and producer. His inventive and multi-award-winning theater works have been presented in over 60 cities across the world, translated into 6 languages. His wide range of audiences have spanned international arts festival goers, queers and underground warehouses, and seniors in regional theaters. Sunny is a proud trans artist. I have this wonderful quote at the beginning that I love, by the way, so I'm going to read it out loud. Quote, "Stories are the foundation of everything, including what we think is possible for ourselves and our planet. I aim to unmask the stories that keep us small and create new ones to call us into a different future." Yes, yes, I love that so much.
Yeah.
I just want to like roar with appreciation. I know there's
Yeah.
much more to say about Sunny. Please go to their website to find out more. But they're our guest today, and we'll get to chatting, which is the event for the day. Sunny, welcome to Conversations from the Alcove.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to get to have this conversation with you.
Yay. So for those of you who follow the series, know that I always start with the same question. I think it's going to be the question forever. Until the end of time or the end of this world, which is how is the climate crisis affecting your art practice and all the ramifications around your art practice?
Yeah, I love that you asked this to everyone as a question, and my answer sort of will is related to the fact that you ask it to everyone as well. But first, I'll do an audio description of myself as well. So I'm a fair-skinned person I'm wearing thick black rimmed glasses. I have brown hair with a little receding hairline, very thick mustache, and kind of somewhere in between a sort of short trimmed beard and kind of thick stubble. And I'm wearing a zebra print shirt, black and brown zebra print. And on my wall behind me to my right is a kind of little a plant holder with a clipping of a plant that's growing out of water. And then to my left is a little portal into another room with a sideboard and a plant and a lamp on it. Yeah, well, I mean, for me, that to your fantastic question, it's like the climate crisis has really started to infused literally every single one of my works. So I definitely, in the last few years, I have some very specific works that are entirely climate themed, including the commission that I'm working on with the Lortel called Apocalypse: A Love Story. Also, last year, I launched a giant kind of theatrical podcast with 9 partners around the world called Climate Change and Other Small Talk, which I'll talk a little more about maybe later. So there are these works that are kind of climate themed, but then what I've really noticed is I really can't conceive of hardly any of my works now without some form of climate framing or climate reference, or sort of climate sneaking into what you might think of as about entirely different things. And I'll give you an example. One of the new plays I'm writing at the moment, I'm a couple of drafts in. It's my first ever Shakespeare adaptation. It's a full adaptation of plot and characters in everyday contemporary English, and it's called Romeo and Jules. So no prizes for guessing which one I've adapted. I don't know if you can hear a plane going by loudly in the background there. Okay, good. So yeah, it's a trans-inspired adaptation with a cisgender Romeo, a trans Jules, and I'm reimagining the two feuding families to look at how trans folks have ended up on the front lines of the culture wars. And so ostensibly, like you kind of think, okay, well, what's that got to do with the climate? But when I really started to digging in and going, okay, well, why have trans folks ended up kind of being this sort of political football, tossed around at the moment? And not only why have, but what is the impact of that? And really kind of looking at, okay, while we are having our attention manipulated into bickering about who's allowed to love who and who's allowed to be what gender, we're having our attention and our resources and our energy diverted away from a much larger tragedy which is unfolding, which is we are, barreling towards, our own extinction and kind of taking down, a lot of other parts of the planet along the way with us. So, so then in my point of view in this adaptation, then I've set the whole thing within a climate crisis, and we kind of start to look at how, at some of the impacts of the ways that, we are being channeled into, into ignoring this larger tragedy. So I'm noticing that happening kind of with all of my works now. The climate is framing and infusing and kind of creeping in a way that it just feels like it is with my everyday life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, one of the things about those of us who have been writing works or making collaborations with other artists around, uh, let's say, climate-centered topics, is that, we've been watching it happen for some time. And there's a little bit of like a frustration, I think, perhaps around, come on, everyone, let's get on board. Like, we got to start talking about it. I mean, I think that, one of the things for me is that, you know, I think you sort of, how was I listening to yesterday? A colleague of mine, we were chatting, and we were talking about, the what seems, if you studied the climate crisis, then it's happening, right? So it's like floods everywhere, like they're happening more frequently, more in more devastating ways, in the U.S., not in the U.S., et cetera. And so wildfires, et cetera. And so, and my friend was saying it happens slowly and kind of all at once. Like, it's like over there, and then there's something in Nepal, and then there's something in Toronto, and then there's something, and then you're like, oh, those feel like isolated incidents, but actually they're not, right? They're interconnected. And I think that one of the things that we can do in theater performance is look at interconnections and look at intersections amongst things, and look at how the climate is not something over there, right? Over there, it's like when people talk about war, over there's a war, right? It's like, it's actually with us, it's embedded in everything that we do. So it does frame absolutely everything. And I think that one of the frustrations, I think I mentioned the word frustration, one of the frustrations that I think some of us have is that it's like, you can't, deliberately ignoring it reinforces the idea that, oh, it is over there, and it's only like those isolated incidents that make it happen. But actually, when we start to look at connections, is where we realize, and again, this goes back to coalition building and solidarity struggles, shared struggles that have to do with people's rights, also have to do with the rights of the planet, environmental rights. And that they are all connected. And I wonder if that's something that is manifesting more and more in your work, or you're kind of like your antenna is going, look there, Sonny, look there. How do I? And is that and I think my question has to do with, does it sometimes start when you make a project, or is it something that's just kind of like already we're in it, so you don't have to kind of call it forth, it just manifests?
Yeah, probably a little bit of both. Like I really resonated with what you said around kind of these sort of changes that are happening kind of slowly and then sort of all at once. And I feel like that is apt in my creative process as well. Is that I've sort of been bubbling on these kind of climate ideas for quite some, for quite a number of years now, and they've slowly kind of infused in. And then I feel like there was a sort of critical mass where all at once I couldn't start like now from the very beginning of a process. I'm like, right, okay, so how is the climate related to this piece, and what point in the kind of foreground or the background is it going to be? So it has kind of become for me a part of my very early process of discovery in a piece, but where it didn't necessarily used to be, it more used to sort of creep in at some point and go, oh, right, okay, yeah, that's related too.
Yeah, I hear you. How did the podcast come to be? I think our listeners and watchers might be intrigued by this. So yeah, I know you
Yeah,
mentioned it
yeah.
earlier. You said, oh, we might talk about it, so
Yeah.
I want to make sure we do talk about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so it came out of I went in 2019, I went on this incredible artist residency on a boat in the high Arctic in the Svalbard Islands, like north of Scandinavia. So it was 30 artists on a boat, and we went and visited the world's northernmost climate science research center. And I got on the boat thinking, right, I'm going to write a full length play on my own, and started writing. And then when I met these scientists, and watched them release their daily weather balloon, which is, very important in collecting their local data, so they can get a kind of local picture of what's going on with the changing climate in that particular area. But then they started talking about, equally importantly, is they combine their data together with hundreds of other weather stations around the world. And it's that real interplay between the very local and the global that is both super important to understanding climate change, but also we find the same kind of things in terms of organizing and change making. Is we can't have a one size fits all solution. Solutions have to be, and data collection, everything has to be very locally based. And yet we also can't have a kind of collection of local groups off doing completely their own thing without some kind of, discussion and negotiation and collaboration. And so I started thinking, okay, output. And, one of my obsessions in my theater practice is how to get the form and style of each piece to reflect the particular content of that piece. So inspired by this like sort of local to global connection, I went, what would a theater project that mirrors some of those values and principles look like? So instead of then writing my whole own full length work, I went, okay, I invited 9 different theatre companies around the world to collaborate with me. Each company had a local team, so that local playwright, directors, sound designers, actors, and each team created their own audio drama episode. So I gave kind of parameters and did some dramaturgical support and kind of made sure creatively it sort of come together as a series. But then each team had a lot of autonomy in, what story they wanted to dig into that had kind of local resonances. And then the form I picked of the audio dramas was really about kind of a way that we could have a sort of, a global audience then participating in and being able to very easily access these works. So yeah, that sort of ended up. It launched last year. I'm so thrilled with the over 100 artists worked on that around the world. So the creative teams are 4 across Canada, because that's where I had a chunk of the kind of resources and relationships. Then also teams in India, Nigeria, Australia, Mauritius, and Chile. And yeah, it was a really fantastic project in terms of like getting to just make these connections with really incredible artists across the world, and get to share, stories with an international audience too.
Yeah. Were there parameters around the audio drama? Did you say like, were you like, like a producer where they say, give me 30 minutes and it has to have 5 characters and blah, blah, blah. Did you do
Yeah,
that or was it more
yeah.
loose?
The parameters I gave were, yes, time-based. I was like, okay, it has to be between, I can't even remember what did I say? Like, I think 10 to 25 minutes, so short audio dramas. And also stylistically, it had to have either some form of humor, satire, absurdity, or levity or comedy in some form. Like, it wasn't kind of prescriptive about what that meant, but really kind of what I was interested in was to create something that you could listen to after a long day's work. What I was noticing with myself was that so many of us are getting fatigued with, not only with life and surviving under capitalism, but also with, fatigued with climate dread and climate anxiety. And so I wanted to kind of create something that you could engage with and delve into these stories, but also that got in sort of sideways through some form of use of humor. So those were kind of the key parameters. Oh, and the parameters were also that it had to be something. So we gave, myself and an impact producer gave all of these kind of prompts from climate justice leaders around the world of sort of like, okay, here's what organizers and climate justice leaders are thinking about and talking about to kind of, as inspiration for folks. But even though those were a kind of global set of prompts, the other part of the parameters were it had to be something kind of locally relevant. So with this idea again of sort of digging into kind of, something that is pressing on you as in your local area, which doesn't have to be kind of documentary style local, but more like just something that it wasn't like, you were taking the inspiration from the, Chilean leader who's doing this and kind of applying that to your, telling that story from your location in Australia, for example. It had to be sort of something more locally grounded. And then, yeah, my job sort of then as the curator it was actually kind of miraculous once then I got these. So I wrote one of them. Once I got in these other 8 short episodes, it was kind of miraculous how, the story, the kind of arc between these works just, it literally took me probably an hour after I listened to them all of going, oh, right. Well, that really kind of like, that comes before that, and so it's my job then to kind of host the audience on a journey through, kind of find a way to, to have us go on a journey through the 9 episodes.
Super cool, super cool. I wanted to touch on 2 things that you mentioned wisely. One of them has to do with form and content and the relationship between them and theater making, and style, a little bit, style and tone, I think are involved in that. And just in general in your work, which of course is varied. Where does that start for you? So, because like for me, I sometimes start with form. Like I go formally, I want to do these 5 things or these 4 things in the play, and then I start from there. But sometimes, what I will say is that sometimes if I don't have that, I feel lost. I feel like I'm
Yeah,
adrift. And I'm like, I have
yeah.
to have some formal something before I can know. Because sometimes there'll be like the subject or the themes, but I need to find a container for them. And the container is usually a formal container. But I don't know if you work that way, or how does it come about for you?
Yeah, I definitely, like I tend to sort of start from something that is interesting me. So it tends to more be the kind of subject or themes. But having said that, immediately the second I go, I might be interested in, exploring a piece about like, nuclear families and what would happen if we shift our relationship to the nuclear family. And immediately before one word goes on the page, and often actually before I've got even the characters, the next thing for me is the form and style and tone of the piece. And then I once I kind of feel like I've sort of nailed then what that's going to look like, then I'll start going in for narrative, characters, etc. And for me, that sort of comes about in that way because, like I said, of my obsession with, like, I want us to kind of be able to tell a little about the subject and the theme from the experience of the style of writing and the, you know, the kind of and the form of the piece. And so therefore I feel like if I go too far down kind of characters or narrative route, it becomes harder for me to kind of ground that the form and style. But I'll give you maybe I'll talk about briefly about a couple of projects that give you
Yeah,
examples of what I
yeah,
mean by how it sort of reflects. And you
yeah.
already had kind of climate change and other small talk, how that one really shaped the form of the piece. And an example of sort of how something shaped the style of the piece. I mean, I just started on it with talking about nuclear families. So a play of mine called Every Little Nookie that premiered at the Stratford Festival in 2022. That's Canada's largest theatre company for the folks who are listening from the US. And it was like I was really interested to kind of go, okay, what's with this sort of obsession with nuclear families, and how would it actually shift our possibilities for social and economic systems if we could just like pry, the grip a little looser on this idea of the nuclear family, both from our kind of platonic means, but also in terms of our relationships as well, our sexual relationships too. So I ended up writing a polyamorous romp, and stylistically, the more the more these characters start to become enmeshed in each other's lives, the more the scenes start to mesh together. So the scenes themselves start more like a nuclear family. Each scene is a contained set of characters, and in one time and one place. And then the scenes themselves, the structure of the scenes become more kind of polyamorous, where we start to see one character, being in more than one scene at once, so that we're hearing them kind of talk to this set of characters, and then literally after this line they're talking to this set of characters in this scene, and we kind of bounce backwards and forwards. And by the time we've built the audience's ability to have a lot of fun following along with having to track multiple scenes at once, at its peak there are 5 scenes played out at once, that the audience follows along with. So really kind of looking at kind of mirroring, having that, then the experience of the style and of the piece kind of mirroring, telling us something about the experience that I'm trying to kind of create for the audience as well. And then another one that's completely different than either of those that I've just described is called Childish. So that's a piece that you and I were just talking about offline.
Yeah.
It's my first ever verbatim piece, and it came about. I got really interested in, more like horrified with how I started to notice that myself and other adults just really don't listen to kids and take kids seriously. And I started having a number of experiences where kids were dropping this quite profound wisdom that I watched sort of like bounce off me until I actually stopped and thought about it and went, whoa, wow, there's a lot in that. So I created then a theatre project where I interviewed over 40 kids, many of them over, a multiple year period, so multiple times, and then created a verbatim script from their exact words that then adult actors perform. And adult actors not pretending to be children, but adults being absolutely deadpan adult performing this text. And so formally then playing with the power dynamic of so it's intended for an adult audience. Does an adult audience listen differently, and in what way, when these words that we know come from kids are being delivered by adults? So really kind of leaning into then the kind of theatrical container of the work to actually do part of the kind of work of the piece itself as much as the text does. So this all has to happen for me immediately and very early, because I feel like if I started kind of writing and exploring, kind of narrative and themes first, I feel like I would literally end up, once I nail I'd end up tearing it all up and going, no, actually, it has to be a ghost story. It's not a like, so for me, I have to nail that, before I start kind of digging into any of the other work of writing a play.
Yeah, and I would imagine I want to touch on a couple of things. So one of them has to do with how works we're writers, so and theater makers. So works do not exist in a vacuum, right? Like you make a piece, and then the piece you made 5 years ago impacts what you're just making because you're still thinking about some of those ideas, or maybe you explored something formally in that one and you want to keep re-investigating that, for example. So how pieces kind of inform each other is sort of something that I want to lift up. The other thing I wanted to lift up is, do you know Sophie Lewis's work, Abolish the Family? Do you know
Oh,
Sophie
yes.
Lewis's?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about Sophie's work when you were describing every little nookie, and I'm a great admirer of Sophie's, and but obviously not the only scholar that's talking about the
Yeah.
nuclear family as a capitalist
Yeah.
structure, right? And a convenient structure for capitalism to kind of reinforce itself. And also, it's like a mental paradigm that gets set into societies. And the other thing I wanted to lift up is there's a piece, it's probably not published anymore. I'll mention it anyway, just because I still love it. And I know it's controversial to say this, but there was a piece called Monkey Bars, which is two
A
performers,
British piece, right?
a British piece. They
Yeah.
performed
Yeah.
the work of children. It was verbatim, so, but it's two actors performing children's speech. I mean, not their speech, like things children said, I should
Yeah.
say. And
Yeah.
so that put me in mind of childish and thinking about like the actual speech patterns, formulations of children, right?
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, it depends what age they are, right? Like in a way, and
Yeah.
what you're kind of notating. So even the act of notation of speech, I think, is really fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'm
And
gonna
has
I'm
been.
gonna lift those things: notation of speech, plays that lead into other plays, and maybe a
Yeah.
little bit of scholarship in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too, like you nailed also why this is childish is such a juicy acting task. It was fascinating. So it premiered in Vancouver earlier this year, and we'll have a production in Toronto next year. And watching the actors grapple with the syntax of children while their task is like the most important direction for the actors is you have to be adult saying these words, and it's so hard. It's so satisfying when they absolutely nail it, but it's really challenging. But yeah, what you were saying too about abolish the family also reminded me of kind of why for me I often choose some form of, not always comedy, but some form of kind of comedy or satire or something with levity, because actually just the last time I saw my family, my partner was with me, and she had a copy of Abolish the Family sitting on the table, and my dad kind of came in and read it and went, Abolish the Family? What's that? And sort of was kind of like a little bit like, it was the kind of basically like an alien was sitting on the table. He was like, what is this alien doing in the room here? Like how, like what is even that concept? And that sounds so horrible because, to him, family, the idea of family is just so incredibly important. And that's something I love about him too. And yet he actually came and saw Every Little Nookie at the Stratford Festival and loved it, thought it was a riot and so fun. And, so like, it's kind of like the ideas in an incredible book like Abolish the Family, like a different way, a different vehicle to kind of talk about some of those ideas that sort of sneaks it in a little bit. And I had the artistic director of the Stratford Festival also say, look, the reason I can program this content, which is actually quite radical content, is because it's funny. You're taking the audience on this kind of fun romp that sort of then just kind of sneaks in these ideas that that audience might not be used to thinking about.
Yeah, so cool. This is the nerdy side of me. It's not nerdy. Frederick James had passed away September 22nd, 2024.
Yeah.
One of the last, I feel like an era has ended. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One of the
Yep.
people to talk about Marxist,
Yeah.
philosophers to talk about like capitalism in such a profound way and consistently over his entire career. And of course, then the question becomes, as artists, we are definitely, as we say, in very, very late capitalism right now. And it's
Yeah.
become sort of cliche to say that, but at the same time, we're living it. And I feel like um, we can't toss it out of hand. And I think that, one of the questions that I've always thought about is like, and this comes from the scholar John Holloway, is how to crack capitalism. Like if we could crack it, then we could move forward. But I think that because being caught in the critique of it is one thing. So okay, it's great to
Yeah.
critique it because that's
Yeah.
necessary, right?
Yeah.
To expose the structures, to sort of see them for what
Yeah.
they are. All those things
Yeah.
are human-made structures. Human-made structures have done this, right? So, but the other part of it is, but we need to crack through them and actually to move forward, right? And this, of course,
Yeah.
is tied to climate change as well. And so, extraction of people, extraction of the planet, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I wonder how, obviously Jameson has impacted all of us, but wondering what strategies you have to crack capitalism in your work.
Yeah. Yeah, these are such great questions. You really love the kind of simple, chill little like Monday afternoon questions.
Just totally
Yeah.
chill,
So
having
let's talk about the
coffee.
climate crisis and cracking capitalism. It's great.
It's
I
awesome.
love it. Yeah, totally.
Gotta
Yeah.
do it. Where else are we gonna do it? We're theater makers.
Yeah,
Revolution.
yeah, right. I mean, okay. Something that I've really been noodling on for the last couple of years is how can we build better relationships and very integrate organizing and art in a much deeper way? Because there are incredible people doing all of this amazing organizing and just for folks who are listeners who may be less familiar with, for example, the difference between organizing and activism, both of which are incredibly important. Organizing being like, people, organizers organize people. So organizing groups of people into movements to create strategic change. And so there are lots of people doing this incredible organizing stuff, and many folks in my community who then also could really benefit from art being integrated into their organizing. And the flip side being there's so much powerful theater and art happening that is completely divorced from organizing. And what I started finding and noticing with my own works was, when a play would go well, I would be so proud that, I'd created kind of an experience where audiences, I hope, would be kind of, having the opportunity to re-examine their worldviews, or like, provide little cracks in the way people are thinking about things, provide these experiences, these emotional experiences to see things in a different way. And then they leave the theater with hopefully a bubbling cauldron of questions and experiences, etc. And they leave the theater and then they go back into the structures of their everyday lives, which are very individualistic, which are very divorced from political discourse, or particularly divorced from actual democracy, people actually participating in how we are, how our worlds are structured and our policies and all of those things. So we kind of go from this profound experience of art working well back into these old structures, and there's nothing there to kind of follow up on. And that theaters are doing some good work with like talkbacks and that type of thing, but I'm talking about way beyond kind of a post-show talkback or something to illuminate the themes. Like, where is the relationship with the organizers who go, oh, you've got a new opening and some questions, let's talk about that. And you know what are you interested to get involved in? Here are some ways to plug in and actually be involved on the ground in these movements that are doing amazing stuff and building. And so I started kind of having these questions more and more, and feeling like, oh, like, how can I leverage the work that I'm doing and support, others? Like, there's such amazing theater and art happening. So our first kind of experiment towards that for me was in Climate Change and Other Small Talk, the theatrical podcast we're talking about. I brought together the resources to hire an impact producer. So that's for some folks who are not familiar with that terminology. It's more a position that's more common in the documentary world. So it's somebody whose job it is to kind of look at the art that's gotten made, or I think ideally to also be involved in the making of the art in a way too. Like I always these days, I mean, for a long time now, I always have political dramaturges as well as, other dramaturges, content dramaturges who can talk about the characters. I have political dramaturges while I'm creating who are able to go, okay, this sort of symbolism here, do you realize you're actually evoking this whole other thing that I haven't even thought about? Potentially participating in the making of the art itself, but particularly an impact producer on the other end goes, okay, here's the art that was created. What are some tangible goals for change that this could tie into, some tangible behavioral change, policy change, etc., to kind of try to leverage then an audience's experience into action afterwards, and particularly into strategic action afterwards. So I kind of went, okay, what would it look like then to have, it's a kind of provocation for me and for others. What would it be like if we saw having an impact producer as completely essential as having a stage manager? Like, would we ever do a theater show without a stage manager? No, we wouldn't, or some equivalent. Maybe there are other kind of, words people would use or etc. But like it would seem kind of ludicrous. Like, so what would it mean for our creative practices if we went, well, of course we've got to have an impact producer, because I mean, what's going to happen with the audiences when they leave the space? So it was an experiment then with hiring an impact producer who then kind of built relationships with organizers and campaigns, and then kind of tied that and fed the sort of audience across to those sort of goals. And I'm really excited then to kind of to start playing around with that on a specific live production in a local area, because some of the challenges we had on that project were it was in 9 locations across the world. It was sort of this global thing. It was also digital, which is different from live. So it was really cool to kind of make a start with experimenting with that, and feel like we're kind of channeling people across to some really good organizing happening. But I'm also really curious what the possibilities for that are in a live production grounded in a very local place.
Yeah, super cool, super interesting. I love this. It makes me think about, I don't know if you know this essay. Brandon Taylor wrote an essay on what he called, I'm going to get the title right, False Light. And it's around morality and storytelling, and also the virtues of evil. And it's an incredible essay looking at, regardless of how your opinions of how Brandon articulates as a thinker. But one of the things he talks about in that essay is that looking at contemporary fiction, particularly, that's sort of the remit of the essay. He says a lot of artists, because they feel this dread because the world is ending, extinction is happening, et cetera. The stories are, he uses the word vaporous. The stories become vaporous. And the idea of looking for the good in everyone becomes sort of like a default, but not in a kind of post-Christian way. Like everyone must be good, because that's what we're all good.
Right.
And then he says, but that's actually, he says the essay looks at the virtue of writing evil, the virtue of actually depicting people who are evil, and actually confronting that, and looking at the interiority of that, and not at but what happened when they were 5 that made them be the evil person, but more like, they could just be like evil. And that evil exists.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a startling essay. It was published December of 2024, the Sewanee Review. And I read it. And at first I was like, Brandon, what are you talking about? I was kind of angry at it. But I keep thinking about it. And what he links it to is the idea of didacticism. So he was talking about like in prior fiction, let's say 19th century, 18th century fiction, the idea that you could have like good people and bad people. and like, and like things happen, and some things are absolutely wrong, like they're
yeah,
absolutely wrong, right? And then
yeah,
people say, oh, that's so black and white, like what do you mean? And he's like, but actually that's really helpful, like to go like some things clear cut, that's
yeah,
wrong, boom,
yeah,
let's stop that,
yeah,
don't do that anymore, right? And so, and it's, and it doesn't mean you have no empathy, but it's more like, he says, we might need to rescue the didactic impulse. We might need to rescue that in writing, and to bring it back and to give it its due politically, to go, yes, this is a polemic. This is what we're
that's
saying.
interesting.
And
Yeah,
I was like really struck by that in relationship to playwriting, right?
yep,
Because in plays we're like the gray area, everything's ambiguous, and I'm like, but there's actually something interesting about like going, there's no gray in that. That's there's a line
yeah,
that has been crossed, right? So I
yeah,
wonder if you have any thoughts on this. I know I've kind of, it wasn't part of our pre-planned questions, but
yeah,
it was
yeah,
inspired by what you were talking about. So I thought I'd
yeah.
bring it up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to read that essay. But from what you just said, yeah, it's fascinating what actually happened for me around having knowing that I would have this impact producer who would be, kind of trying to create these different relationships with organizers, etc. It actually made me, and this is sort of slightly different than what you were talking about,
Yeah.
but it made me kind of feel a little freer in terms of not having to be didactic in my work, because I felt like I could kind of zone into kind of like talk, my short audio drama could really explore some of the kind of themes or experiences or emotional side of things that I wanted to without having to actually prescribe. And this is the solution, and this is exactly where the problem came from. To kind of like know that it was kind of going to be part of like the rest of the project was then, kind of okay, how to scoop that audience up for asking these questions, for figuring out what to do, where to go with their energy from here. So that I found that kind of an interesting freeing thing from having to be didactic. But that's interesting what you're talking about is, the kind of when I guess that's sort of in a way kind of part of my answer around is that if the art itself is actually more holistic in the way that it is part of a project of organizing, that then potentially some of the kind of more didactic elements or the more right this is wrong and this is right, or this is some solutions or black, and kind of be scooped up outside of the art as well. But yeah, but more directly, does it, is there a place for it in the art? I mean, I am definitely, my personal tastes, which I know are not the tastes of a lot of people. I don't mind when there are some specifically like, uh, um, political rants in pieces. I like it to be elegant. I like it to be kind of character motivated. I like it to be, but I go to the theater to have an experience, but also to kind of learn some different ideas and stuff. And sometimes, yeah, I mean, I don't want my pieces to be so kind of like gray area-ish that people don't actually understand what my point of view is in the piece as well. And yes, I know I can't kind of control and go have them come away with the exact POV that or things I wanted them to, but there are a few bottom line things in each of my pieces that I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to have a character just literally say this because I think it needs to be said, and I think it needs to be said in this way and not in a kind of black and white way. No, sorry, I mean not in a gray area way, in a definitive, this is kind of how I see things and what I think, is going on here. So yeah, but I'll definitely be interested to read that article you said.
Yeah, yeah. If you can't find it, I'll send it to you. It's online, but you can read it. It's really beautiful, and obviously he's an incredibly persuasive writer. But yeah, it just made me think about the depiction of evil in writing specifically, and how there is a kind of moral challenge to that, that I think sometimes contemporary artists are, and that's of course a general statement of his, but he says contemporary artists are shying away from
Yeah,
like literally stepping into that moral breach and saying, you know what, fiction has a role in answering to society. and confronting it is important. So it's kind of been rattling my brain a little bit,
Yeah.
and maybe it'll
Yeah.
impact what I make next. But it's something I thought I'd bring up, especially because you were talking about working with an impact producer and so forth, where
Yeah.
there are clear goals set in mind, and also the idea of efficacy and strategic action, right, coming out of the work.
Yeah.
And I think it's linked to the idea of how we present something. It doesn't mean that there's only one way of doing that, but it's something that I've been thinking about. I want to shift gears a little bit to talking about time in theater, and it is, of course,
Yeah.
one of the things that we work with. That is one of the essential ingredients, time and
Yeah.
space, right? So we are a durational art form, and that duration happens in different ways. It can happen digitally. It can happen, sort of in a kind of a live space, but it can happen also live and in person, with others in a space, or this thing with audience being distant. I mean, there's so many ways of interacting in theater, right? So,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking about how you consider time when you're making something, like, and I don't just mean running time, obviously, but how you're manipulating time and thinking about
Yeah.
temporality. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's one of the great joys of making theater is the ability to play both with time and space in a way that, audiences come in and because their imaginations are such a key ingredient in theatre in a way that they may be less so in mediums like film and TV, where audiences are so used to they can literally see the entire, you can, as if you sort of zone out your peripheral vision, you can feel like you're really in the space. There's not a lot of imagination required compared to in a theater. There's someone literally coughing next to you, or like, kind of wriggling in the seat in front of you. The sets, I mean, yes, there are kind of some sort of more realistic kind of living room sets, but I mean, certainly a lot of the theater I'm interested in, is not necessarily kind of a drawing room play. Um, uh, and so it's a given when you step into a space that you are going to have to be an active participant and use your imagination. And because there's that invitation right from the get-go to use your imagination, it's so fun then as a creator to go, I can do anything with time and anything with space. I can set up in the first 5 minutes, okay, every time the character kind of says this, a bell, every time a bell rings, like we know that, right, we're suddenly going into, a deep future space that's fused with, like, we can just play so much with time and space. So there, in that way, I feel like time just becomes this sort of fun part of the whole quest that I was talking about earlier, of how is the style and the tone and also the theatrical devices, how is time going to be treated in a way that lends itself to that piece. Like, I mean, the first thing that sort of jumps out, to give a different example of my work, is a comedy called Men Express Their Feelings. And I was interested to kind of like, explore like toxic masculinity and what revision masculinity for the 21st century. And so I kind of picked, I was like, all right, the sort of site of uber toxic masculinity, where it can kind of come out, being sports, but also where some beautiful sides of masculinity can come out in sports too. And then looking at, in a Canadian context, the pinnacle of uber masculine sport being hockey. So I wrote a hockey play and then structured the whole work like a game of hockey. So into 3 periods, and where we have characters periodically kind of step out of the action to commentate this sort of high stakes game of emotions that's going on. And then we have these instant replays of different key emotional moments, but we play them from like a sports instant replay. So like, that when someone scores a goal, you see it from all the different angles and they replay it many different times. So in the play, we kind of replay, instead of the sports moments, these key emotional moments from the different emotional POVs of the characters. And that sort of then being, I guess, kind of, again, how I was using time then going back to the kind of style and form of the piece, which went back to what did I want to say about, the kind of subject and themes and content. So yeah, kind of time for me is like another just extremely fun ingredient to play. And I do eventually, I would like to, do some TV writing as well. But every time I kind of start dabbling in that form, I just fall back in love with theater again, where I'm like, oh, but the things I can do when the audience is just so prepared to go, oh, okay, that's the device with time. Cool. Like, we're with you. We're going on this journey. Yeah. I mean, another thing I think about time so much is like I grapple and struggle and go backwards and forwards with between how much to try to future proof my works in terms of knowing it takes 5 bajillion years to get a piece to the stage. And, there's one approach which, is just kind of like, look, write it. And you have ultimately not a lot of control over when and how it's going to go to stage. I mean, this could be another thing we get into talking about is, kind of DIY. I come from a very DIY theater background. So I used to be able to go, oh, new idea, I'm going to create this. It's going to be on a in a living room or a backyard or a basement in a month, and that was a very different relationship then to now where I'm creating a piece going, okay, well, in a great scenario, this is going to premiere in 4 years. That's a great scenario, and so how to kind of then create work that is muscular and juicy to me in the moment, but that also I can't anticipate what the world in 4 years' time is going to be like. So I kind of go backwards and forwards between going, look, just let it go. I'll fix it in post. When it's like in 4 years' time when it's premiering, I'll rewrite kind of certain parts of it to update it. And I do tend to really like to keep my scripts fresh and kind of updated anyway. But yeah, versus also, I still think there are just some kind of little layers that can help future-proof it. So I mean, to give an example, and I don't know whether this is a good idea or not yet. I'm just kind of contemplating it. But in Romeo and Jules, I hope that when it, if and when it premieres in 4 or 5 years' time, I hope that we are going to be in a different place around, how we treat my trans community. I'm trans myself, as we mentioned from my bio. I hope that we will be in a different place. And realistically, I know we will still be in process around that. But however, like I'm kind of like, oh, by the time it premieres, will it sort of be kind of seen as like this kind of analysis, I guess, of like from a story lens of like how trans folks have ended up on the front lines of the culture wars? Will that kind of feel outdated? And so, but actually kind of looking at, okay, what's the history and what's the lineage? And this is something that Jamison is so amazing at in, like kind of is connecting things to, histories of movements and art, et cetera, as well. Looking at kind of like the history of, okay, well, this is not the first time that this strategy of creating a wedge issue to kind of divert people's attention has been used. It has a long history in the way abortion was used in Bob Jones University, in gay marriage. Like this is not the first nor the last time that this strategy will be used. So kind of like framing this work, and this might not actually even necessarily need to be in the piece itself, but it's in the framing of the work, looking at kind of, well, how does that happen and what are the consequences and what are the impacts? So I think for me, the future proofing part is sometimes it might be like a line or 2 lines or something dropped into the play, or knowing a little, like sort of giving myself some peace by knowing it'll be in the framing of the play at the time, or that I'll be able to fix it at the time. But it's definitely kind of something that I think about because I know how long pieces take to get to the stage.
Yeah, it takes forever, and if they get there as well, right? So I think, I've had, sometimes I write something and like if it's supposed to be contemporary, um, I call it a history play. Do you know what I mean? I just call it a history play in my head, and I go,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
it'll be a
yeah,
marker of that year or those two
yeah,
years. You know what I mean? Like I kind of, but then another part of me is also like, but how do I future proof it? What do I do? And I think that what I
yeah,
found a
yeah,
lot there's, because I look at the plays of mine, that there's some that have been produced more than others, and the ones that are more like amorphous about time, like when they're like literally historical time in terms of setting, um, get done more often, because
Right.
people are like,
Yeah.
it can happen anywhere,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And
Yeah.
and a part of me is like, oh, okay, so maybe that's the secret, question mark, like, but I
Uh-huh.
also don't want
Uh-huh.
to give up the idea of writing to the moment, like things that are happening in the now. And some of it is having to make peace with the fact, well, it'll be a history play, it'll be seen that way, and that's fine.
Yeah.
There's a place for that too. I mean, we have to write what's happening,
Yeah. Yeah.
because who else is going to? I mean, we're
Yeah.
living in the age of disinformation, among other things, and so it feels like
Yeah.
recording literally the events of our time is going to be necessary, especially with not only disinformation but also the deletion of digital libraries and archives. Right, like literally, what is those streamers that just kind of erase like 30 years of like history from the archives, and you're like, all those shows are gone. And you can never
Yeah.
find them again. Like they're gone. Like
Yeah.
all that artistic labor is sort of gone, but also they're a record of that time, right? Like all those
Yeah.
years that show was running and that show was running, you can't retrieve that information anymore. So I think about the power that we have to actually record accurately,
Yeah.
because it might be the last power we have left these days. I
Yeah.
wanted to end with a question on inspiration. What's inspiring you these days in times of extinction?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just had this very beautiful experience so I'm still pinching myself that I got to go back to that Arctic residency that I was mentioning, that I went to in 2019. I just got to go back to it for a second time, a month ago. And something very surprising happened for me, which is firstly to say that, like, basically the entire boatload of artists all got COVID, which was, kind of at first, like, I mean, I do not, to preface this story by saying I do not recommend getting COVID on a boat. And I have a lot to say about, kind of the COVID protocols, et cetera, as well. And given that that is the situation I ended up on, was being very sick in the middle of, the Arctic, I actually had quite a profound experience where I went, okay, you know what? Work has to stop, which is always a big deal for me because I'm obsessed with my work. Work has to stop. My only priority right now is to get better and not get long COVID. So on the boat, I just immediately kind of stopped, and I was so ill for a few days. All I had energy for was to listen to my own breath. I essentially kind of became a temporary master meditator. I've gone back to being a terrible meditator since, but I had this experience of, just being able to listen to my breath the entire couple of days. And then the only other thing I had energy for was I sat out on the deck and just looked out at the colors in the land and the sea and the sky. And from that place of such deep presence, I had this so much pleasure. I started experiencing just, I was so sick, but I was having the best, most pleasurable time. And on day 3 of me being sick, we arrived at this like giant ice shelf. By giant, I'm talking 180 kilometers long, like just this mass of ice. It's the world's 3rd biggest ice shelf. And I stepped out on deck, and it was so beautiful. And I'd been immersed in this place of presence for 3 days that I just started bawling my eyes out. And it wasn't sad bawling my eyes out. It was so incredibly pleasurable. And it just gave me this question and this provocation for myself, like, what if I myself and us in our world organized ourselves around a principle of pleasure with the earth, rather than seeking pleasure at the expense of the earth? And so that pleasure, and it was interesting too, because the first 5 days before I got sick, I'd been sort of spinning my wheels creatively a little. I'd been also searching for grief, because I've noticed the last couple of years, I can't actually connect to climate grief or climate anxiety anymore. And that was kind of like quite a strong fueler of my work, was kind of like worry and grief and stress. And I was sort of like, and I continue to be creating climate work, but I think somewhere in me, unconsciously I was worried that without that as a driving force, how am I going to be able to create my work? And then when I started sobbing in pure pleasure at this experience with, just being so present with this beautiful part of the world, I then again started looking, oh, maybe there's grief beneath the tears, but there actually wasn't. There was kind of just a pure pleasure. And I decided to do an experiment then with my work once I kind of got back to writing, to go, okay, what would it look like to actually create with pleasure as a driving principle? And out of that, I had a transformation of my piece. I had a writing kind of frenzy that was incredibly pleasurable, that shifted the direction of a work that really opened up kind of new and different possibilities for me. And so I just kind of felt inspired as somebody who, I get to experience sort of a lot of incidental pleasure in my work, because I'm so grateful that I get to be a theater artist. I love my job, but it's not my driving force at all. And it's quite foreign to me, the thought of, kind of using pleasure as a guiding principle in my work. And so, yeah, I'm feeling, even though since getting off the boat, I've sort of up and down on that. Like, I've used that a number of times, and I've actually felt very inspired at the shift in my creative practice with applying that technique. So yeah, that's a thing that's inspiring me at the moment. It's pleasure.
I love it. I love it. And what a great way to end on. Thank you so much, Sunny, for being in conversation with us. For those of you who watch the series, what I usually do is hit end recording, but then I stay online just a little bit offline from you, online for us, to say some so longs with our guest artists. If you follow the series, check out the next episode, check out prior episodes. We're here as long as the digital archive exists. And thanks for visiting Conversations from the Alcove. Till the next time.
Thanks so much. Bye.